Hello, and welcome to the Next Minute podcast. Within the podcast, we'll be taking a deep dive into grief and various topics surrounding mental health, predominantly focusing on the grief side. I'm your host Sean, a widowed dad of 2 boys, a full-time employee and a volunteer for a mental health peer-to-peer support group, which really leaves little time for anything else. So I thought, why not do a podcast on top of the responsibilities of being a full-time dad, employee and part-time volunteer. So with each episode, we'll listen to stories of loss and struggles with grief and mental health. Within those stories, there will be hope and details of how we move forward. Hopefully, our stories will shine a light on the variety and complexity of emotions that come with grief and mental health. Through this, we're hoping to show you that no matter what you're feeling, it is normal. So we aim to have a new episode every week, so make sure you follow, like and subscribe and never miss an episode. As mentioned in episode 1, we're looking to have a guest join us, tell us all about who they've lost, sharing tales, memories and funny anecdotes along the way. So through sharing our stories, we're hoping to show that grief isn't linear. We all experience, feel and deal with grief in our own way. So if you're interested in being a guest on the show, feel free to email us at thenextminutepodcast@outlook.com. Continuing on from the last episode, we were looking at the blogs I wrote around the time of Taylor's death. The next one is titled Our Last Goodbye, and then in brackets, in person. So this one was written roughly 10 days after Taylor's passing, and when I was reading back, going over it again, I could see that there's elements of anger in there, which anger played a massive part in my grief. It still does, to be honest, at some points, and I'm sure it comes up quite a bit more throughout the blogs as well. So this particular blog I wrote over a couple of days. It was interesting to see how my mood shifted between the 2 days. In fact, how it shifted sort of throughout a particular day as well. So it starts with a typical day. We got the kids ready to set off to take Elijah to nursery. Had music on in the car, and I'd made a playlist, some of Taylor's favourite songs. Now, those who knew Taylor, music was a huge part of her life. So that then became very emotive for me when I was listening back to those songs. This particular day was quite a good day though. I could listen to the songs and smile. I cried when one of our songs came on, but it wasn't necessarily a cry of grief. It was just sort of triggered that emotion in me. Now, not long after dropping Elijah off at nursery, I got a call to that Taylor was ready in the chapel arrest. And I've been waiting for that call. Couldn't wait to see her again. Not long after, I met up with Jamie, who's obviously Taylor's sister, and we both went down to see her. And I was really apprehensive about going in, worried sort of like how she'd look, and how I'd feel obviously seeing her. But she looked the same. She was different, but she looked the same. She still looked beautiful to me, and I was kind of worried about how I'd react, but I didn't really, I don't think. I just remember feeling like overwhelmed with love, but equally loss as well. It was quite a surreal moment. I was actually surprised at how much I've suppressed around this time. Reading it back, it's really sort of opened my eyes as to how much my brain has kind of protected itself from some of these memories. One thing that I've always remembered though is noticing how cold it was, and I just wasn't prepared for it. For some reason it really caught me off guard, and I remember thinking I just need to make sure that she's warm. She hated being cold, so that was one of the big things for me, was just making sure that while she was in there that she was warm. So I'd sit there, I'd hold her hand, and her hand would be freezing. So I'd hold it tight, and I'd read her one of her favourite stories, The We Three Men. Cole would be sat usually by my feet in his sort of car seat, usually wrapped up and just chilling, or he'd be in my arms as I was juggling him, the book and his bottle as well. So a bit of a handful going visiting her. And I just remember I wanted to spend as much time with her as possible, hold her hand, kiss her, tell her I loved her while she was still with me in person. I just felt like I was on borrowed time and knew that she'd be taken from me again, and it'd be soon. And I hated that feeling, just losing her all over again. That was something that was like deep rooted in those sort of moments when I was in there, that I knew that my time with her was short. So when I was in there, I would sort of give her little updates on how the boys were doing, how Elijah was doing at nursery, anything sort of new that Cora had done, or how I was getting on with them. I would just give her little updates as to how our family was doing. And then once I'd done that, I would sit and read to her. The next line that I wrote that I will steal back as much time with her. And I remember the overwhelming anger that our time and our future had just been sort of taken from us for no reason. It was just bad luck. I hated not having someone to blame, no place to direct my anger. Not having an outlet for the anger was something that really, really took its toll on me. And the following day I was sort of back at the chapel arrest again. Again, just trying to get as much time with her as possible. But this time I went with Brian and Carla. Now, if you remember from episode 1, I mentioned Brian and how he was one of the sort of constants through this just journey for me. But what I found weird was I generally had no recollection of sort of this moment until I read the blog back. It was kind of like it rebooted the memory for me. So I went in with both obviously Brian and Carla, and we all had some time with Taylor, shared some stories, and I remember us having a bit of a laugh as well. Can't remember what over, just remember we were sort of in there, we had a bit of a laugh and a joke, just sort of reminiscing really. Then Brian and Carla left and I had some time on my own, and then everything just sort of kind of changed at that point. I spoke with Taylor, held her hand again, told her I'd never stop loving her, promised I would do my best with the kids, and then I just kind of broke. I remember it so vividly as well, and I just couldn't catch my breath. I was sobbing uncontrollably. It was like that grief, that sort of dark cloud consumed me, and it was one of those where you're shaking and you're physically reacting to the grief. And I started to apologise to her, and I was apologising because I wanted it to be me. I wrote in the blog that I wasn't sure why I was apologising, but I know now that it was because I was alive. I felt guilty that I was alive and would get to experience the kids growing up, the nativities and the plays they're doing and the sports and all those events. And because she wanted to be a mum more than anything, and she only got 2 years of that, that guilt it still sits with me now. And even just talking about it now, I can physically feel it. And I remember thinking she shouldn't have died. It wasn't fair. It isn't fair. And that just, like I said, in that moment, it just consumed me. And when I started to leave the room, I collapsed to the floor. Brian came over to kind of hold me up. I was just completely drained. What was strange about it though was I was quite relieved as well. I felt like getting some of that anger out and apologising and venting and just letting it all out in that moment. It did feel like there was a bit of a weight lifted from me. Just apologising to her, finally letting go of some of that guilt. It floored me, quite literally. And I just can't believe I didn't remember that until I read this back. That was quite eye-opening for me as to how much I've kind of suppressed. Now, I ended up going back in that day. It was more peaceful. I sat there, I just listened to some of our songs with her, sang along to some, and she probably thought she'd escaped some of my awful singing at that point. But yeah, we just had, I think I had about half an hour with her. Just sat there, listened to some songs, held her hand. Didn't really do anything else, but it was one of those where I felt like I needed it. Now, next I want to talk about things that I miss in the blog. Now what's funny is most people will think these are some of the small, insignificant moments, some of the more boring and mundane parts of being in a relationship. But when they're gone, you realise just how significant these moments are. So, he's getting me again now. So just holding hands, stealing little kisses throughout the day, whether it's a peck on the cheek or the forehead, little glancing touches as you pass each other in the house, or you're sort of dancing around each other, cooking in the kitchen, trying to make sure you don't bump into each other. And then not to mention the silly little moments that only you two share. Nobody sees these little moments, they're just yours. So one of ours, sort of in like the last 2 months, there was this erectile dysfunction advert on TV. I was a few years older than Taylor, and she used to always make a joke that because I was older, she'd sort of hint that, oh, be paying attention to this advert. And like, she never missed a beat. As soon as the advert came on, she'd just give me the look, and I was just like, oh, behave. And it was just like those little moments that you really do miss. Even I just sat there on the couch, you know, one of those nights where you're not really doing anything, sort of doom scrolling, and then she'd find like a funny story or a thread on social media, and she'd be sat there just laughing her head off, reading them back to me. And yeah, it's just those moments that even when I've spoken with many widows over the years, and they all say the same, it's those moments that mean the most. Just those little moments that are just for you two. Taylor quite often talked about death as well. She'd frequently ask me to promise her that I wouldn't die before her, and I never truly understood why until I lost her. And I'm glad she didn't have to go through this, if I'm honest. I'd do this every single time just to spare her that pain. I would just make it a lot later in life that we lost her. So she'd get to experience everything that she's going to miss out on. Like I said, all those activities, the plays, the sports, all the achievements that the kids are going to go on to achieve. All those moments they should be here for. I would make sure she got those. But she wouldn't deserve to go through any of the grief and pain that I've gone through. And I wouldn't wish that on anyone. But later that day, later that same day, it kind of changed again. That mood was shifting from some form of peace or contentment to just being completely overwhelmed with the reality again. And it was just setting in. And that evening I felt like I'd lost her all over again. I realised I won't be able to see her, touch her, stroke her hair, kiss her again. That feeling of the weight on my chest had come back. The physical pain I talked about in the last episode, it was there again, and it was heavier. And this was where the thoughts of not wanting to be here anymore started to creep in. Thoughts that would be growing in the back of my mind, and I see it now because I know more, but I didn't recognise the signs back then. So it was particularly a bad night as well with Elijah that night. I wasn't sticking to the routine well enough. I was giving in to him when he was asking for things like chocolate, despite me initially saying no. And he just ended up getting his way. But I just didn't have the energy to sort of put my foot down and fight him on those little things. And then that made me feel worse because I know that was one of Taylor's pet peeves, that I would sometimes be too soft on him. But there was just nothing left in the tank. I just didn't have the energy to say no and then deal with the tantrum. But when I picked him up early that day, he hugged me, and it felt like it was the tightest and the biggest hug he'd ever given me. I'd always felt guilty, particularly in those early days, that Cole was getting more attention. Obviously, he was a baby, he needed more of that attention. And it just felt like that hug from Elijah was like he was saying, I know you're doing what you can. And how tight it held me. And it might be in my head, but it just felt like it was the biggest hug he'd ever given me. And it felt like he knew that I needed it. it was just one of them moments where that was something I never forgot. That particular hug. Now when we went back home, it kind of changed again. So we were sorting the tea. Elijah was playing upstairs. Elijah wanted to play upstairs, and I'd said no to him. And then I was in the kitchen. I was cooking tea. Cole was around as well. We had that little sort of disagreement where I couldn't take him upstairs. I couldn't watch him. Cole was downstairs and had the tea on. And it was moments like that that started to add and cause the anxiety and to get worse and to build. It was just that Elijah was having a meltdown because he couldn't play upstairs. I would go and try and calm him down. When I'm doing that, Cole would start to cry, and the food was still on. It needed stirring, it needed plating up, all that. It was just kind of like, if you pick up one task, you're dropping the other two, but then the other two immediately need your attention. And it was just so hard to balance all of that. And what I felt like was that I couldn't balance any of it. I was just constantly putting fires out, or trying to put fires out. And I'd put one out and then another one would start. And I just couldn't handle it. And I felt like I was failing. I felt like I was just getting worse at being a dad. And I know at this moment in time that the confidence in being a dad was just at an all-time low. It felt like it was non-existent. I just felt like I was constantly doing the wrong thing, or it just felt like I was failing. And in that moment I found myself apologising to Elijah, and then I apologised to Taylor as well, just because I felt I'd let her down. I promised her earlier in that day, or the day before, that I'd do my best with the kids, and I just felt like I was failing. And the blog kind of ends there. It was quite an abrupt ending. But what I noticed throughout it is there's quite a lot of mistakes, particularly like spelling mistakes. And I remember when I wrote it, I was in floods of tears. I was just in a crying fit. I was shaking. And I know it was this particular blog because I accidentally published it at the time that I wrote it, which I never wanted to do. I was tired, I was exhausted, and I just remember I hit publish and I didn't want to. The main reason I didn't like to publish them when I wrote them is I didn't want to deal with, the comments, and they were never bad comments. There was always like reassuring comments, but in those moments where I was really feeling it, I didn't want that reassurance. I wanted to feel how I was feeling. I needed to feel that. And then obviously the comments did start to come in, and I just kind of had to ignore them. I didn't want to deal with them. And I just needed to be in that sort of dark space. And I think sometimes you do need to feel it. You do need to feel that grief and to kind of process it, as hard as it is. Now, what I will say is, we talked a lot about the moments of the chapel arrest, and they were critical for me. They helped me in a time when I felt like time had been stolen from me. But that gave me a chance to kind of claw some of that time back by going to see her. In the moments where I was sat holding her hand, like it meant a lot. And what I started to do was whenever it was cold, or not even when it was cold, when I was driving, I would just stick my hand out the window. I'd just sort of dangle it there, driving. And then obviously you leave your hand out when you're driving, it's just going to get cold. And I still do that to this day. And it just kind of takes me back to those moments where I last held a hand in the chapel arrest. And it's probably going to sound a little bit weird, but it just brings me comfort. Just reminiscing and going back to that time where I last held a hand. As obviously sad as it was in the chapel arrest, but it just means a lot to me that I can still go back to that time in my mind and just hold a hand one last time. So that kind of brings the end of this second episode. Like I said, the blog kind of ended quite abruptly, and then obviously we're publishing it by accident as well, and then dealing with all that. I think I probably would have added more to it if I had saved it as a draft. So what I intend to do, obviously at the end of each episode, particularly when I've got guests, is just to have them answer a couple of closing questions, just to add a little bit more information sort of around grief, and strategies of coping with grief and navigating it, but to leave us on a lighter note as well. So again, it's only fair I do the same, and as these episodes go on, it'll probably be a little bit more difficult for me to keep answering these questions, but we'll just dive in. So the first one is, what if anything surprised you with the process of grieving? I think for me, I might have touched on it in the last episode, but just that it's not linear. So there's obviously stages of grief, but they don't have a particular order. Like I said, anger was a big part of my grief, and still is now, but it comes in waves. And even now, at 5 years out, some days will take me back to day one, and there wouldn't necessarily be something that triggers it. It would just sort of come over you. The stages do tend to include things like denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. I think they're the 5 main ones. But I don't feel like I really felt bargaining. Maybe that was me thinking it should have been me instead of Taylor, or maybe it was me feeling like I was stealing some time back in the chapel. But the rest hit me, and they don't have any particular order or reasoning as to when they hit. We all experience grief, obviously, and its stages differently, and I expect it will be the same with another loss as well. I've lost quite a few people along the way, and each grief I experienced was unique to the person that I lost. So there's no order to grieving. Just however you grieve is right for you and right for your circumstances. The next question is, when you think of the person, what's the first thing that comes to mind? Now, obviously I answered this in the last one, in the last episode, but one thing that always comes to mind, particularly for a lot of people, is how thoughtful Taylor was. She'd always put so much effort into people and really getting to know them. She'd always make sure they would get the most thoughtful gifts, and would always go out of her way to make sure she got it just right as well. And I'll tell you what, the gifts have certainly gone downhill. Well, since then, the best my dad ever got was a t-shirt and with a swear word on it that wouldn't fit him anymore, so yeah, they've definitely gone downhill. Last one is, what's a funny memory you have with the person that you don't mind sharing? So for me, probably leading on from the t-shirt one, leads into this actually. So when I first brought Taylor home to meet my parents, I knocked on the door and my dad opened it. Now, Taylor had a t-shirt on with the slogan, "I am calm, now F off." Now, if any of you know my dad, you'll know that he's quite old-fashioned, particularly when it comes to swearing. He's not a big fan, and he promptly slammed the door in our faces. Lucky for us, he was joking, of course he was. It was just one of those things that we laughed about. We still do. And a couple of years ago, when I mentioned the t-shirt that my dad got that was too small, that was what I gave him for Christmas. I wrapped the t-shirt up for him, put it in a frame, and gave it to him on Christmas, just as a bit of a joke. And my dad ended up, I think he's still got it hung up in his bedroom. He cried when he opened it as well. And I think he knew that the meaning behind it and the story. He laughed, but he cried as well. And I know she would have definitely called him a little bitch as well when he started crying. The other thing to mention is about my dad is he was dead set against tattoos. Obviously Taylor had quite a few tattoos, and when we lost Taylor, or when she gave birth, she was wearing a Stitch t-shirt from obviously Lilo and Stitch, and on it had Ohana. And my dad's got a tattoo now with the date that he first met Taylor, and Stitch with the phrase Ohana underneath him. So I think it's fair to say that she had and left a good impression on my dad. This brings a close to obviously the second episode now. So if you take anything away, just know that whatever you're feeling, no matter how alien those feelings are, they're normal and there's plenty of support available. And I'll always plug the Hub of Hope. It's a great website and an app that provides a directory of support, and you simply just have to enter your area or postcode, anything that you might be struggling with, and it will return a list of local and nationwide resources available to you. You can follow the Next Minute page on Facebook as well, where there'll be additional content available along with links to different platforms, and I'll also be sharing different resources that have helped me along the way as well. If you enjoyed this episode, please do like, follow and subscribe. If you feel like someone you know may benefit from listening, just give us a share as well. Thanks again for joining me. Remember, you can get through the next minute.